Today, Timothy Stenzel, the Director of the Office of In Vitro Diagnostics and Radiological Health in the Office of Product Evaluation and Quality, and Toby Lowe, the Associate Director of the Office of In Vitro Diagnostics and Radiological Health, both from CDRH, will provide a brief update. Following open remarks, we will open the line for your questions related to the development and validation of tests for SARS-CoV-2. Please remember that during today's town hall, we are not able to respond to questions about specific submissions that may be under review. Now I will turn the call over to Timothy.
Yes, apologies for the delays. We had multiple technical issues. And I'm not sure that everybody who wants to be is on the call quite yet. We did have formal remarks that we are ready to present, but I think we're going to delay on that until we have as many people call in as possible. People should look to their emails if they're if you know folks who are having trouble connecting with the connection information. And with that, I think we'll get right into questions. We'll take questions for a little bit, then we'll pause and do the usual announcements. And so, operator, if you were able to set up the questions, that would be great.
And if you would like to ask a question over the phone, please press star 1. One moment. Thank you for your patience. Our first question comes from Shannon Clark. Your line is now open.
Hello, this is Shannon Clark with UserWise Consulting. I have a question about point-of-care molecular or antigen tests. For those using a mid-terminate swab, after the clinical evaluation testing is complete, can we add an additional swab with perhaps the same fit, form, and function as the originally used swab to the test kit? So imagine that the point-of-care testing and clinical evaluation testing are completely done. It's been like a month. Can we add another swab with the same fit, form, and function as originally used swab and include both swabs in the emergency use authorization, just to ensure continuity of the supply chain due to concerns about, well, what if this one swab that's authorized is no longer available? And then also, like, what are the aspects of fit, form, and function that would be concerning to the FDA in this context? Does that make sense?
I think I understand, and we absolutely want to ensure adequacy of supply chain. Our prepared remarks was going to speak to some supply chain, potential supply chain issues, and our focus on making sure that that's not an issue. So, if it's also a mid-turbinate swab, and it is just a different provider, but a different swab manufacturer, it's unlikely to cause a review issue. But that's the sort of question to ask the review team. We're going to be very supportive of adding additional alternatives, especially if it's just the same body site. So if it's mid-turbinate to mid-turbinate with antigen tests, that's going to be easier than if you move to a different site or location, and that might need additional validation, but hopefully minimal and perhaps only analytical validation at most of additional swab that is the same as the study swab.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next question, I believe the name is Beth. Your line is now open. Okay, moving on to the next question. It comes from Richard. Your line is now open.
Thank you. This is Richard Montagna. We received EUA authorization back in April for a PCR-based test that used respiratory samples, and we subsequently amended that to include saliva that was collected with a healthcare worker. We're now working to have a self-collection kit developed, and we put together a usability study, which we actually sent a draft off to one of the lead reviewers the other day, and they got back to us yesterday and suggested that we send it in as a pre-EUA. My question is it permissible to restrict that pre-EUA to just the usability study, or will you require that we fill out the whole template? Thank you.
I think you can just fill out the new items and refer to your previous submission for all other details. The reason that they're asking for that is so that we, with all the thousands of applications we receive, we want to make sure that we track things in our electronic system. And by sending it in rather than just an email, but as a pre-EUA, that gets logged in and tracked, and everything gets connected, and we don't lose. We don't risk losing information.
All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thank you. And our next question comes from Komu Mudi. Your line is now open.
Good afternoon. Thanks for taking the question. I am Kodumudi Venkateswaran from Tetracode. Actually, I have seen your article, Dr. Stenzel, in New England Journal of Medicine recently about the COVID-19 antibody test, the FDA's experience. What I would like to ask you is, at least for molecular tests, there are some reference standards that were made available by FDA and other the government agencies. Has anything being done for serology test on this basis, or can you kind of throw some light on what are the steps that are given by the agency or the other government partners to provide reference material for serology assay developers? Thank you.
Yeah, that's an important question. We still are evaluating tests at NCI. It's an interagency government effort. Obviously, NCI, CDC, BARDA, FDA, and that program is still active, and we are sourcing samples for that. Toby may know more details. I know we are still looking for the ability to send out samples, and I haven't gotten an update recently from them that says that they're ready to send those, so I expect that they're still working on it. It has been a bit of a challenge to source of these samples, and so, in enough quantity to provide to all developers. Have noted that WHO has recognized international standard. I know it's available for molecular. I don't know if it's available for serology yet. So that certainly could be helpful to you. We'll take a note. We'll specifically query the interagency group and provide an update next week on serology, a sample panel or anything like that.
So is there any priority for this, or it is low priority?
We've been working on that for a long time, but if we have challenges just keeping enough samples going for the NCI effort, and we don't have any extra, we haven't probably been able to move that. So the NCI evaluation program would take priority over sending out panel material.
Thank you.
Thank you. And our next question comes from Ellen Allen. Your line is now open.
Oh, hi. Thank you. We recognize FDA's efforts to prioritize the EUAs and terminate or decline acceptance of new EUAs based on this prioritization scheme. Are there any guidelines FDA can provide for us who have EUAs that have been accepted and are pending review, and how long those authorizations can be expected if they're not a priority EUA?
Yeah, I think this is now a good time to do our introductory announcements. Toby, I'll just address the specifics of this question, and then I do have
Hello?
Kim, if you're still talking, we can't hear you.
One moment. Looks like we're experiencing a little technical difficulty. Please stand by.
Okay, so it looks like Tim may have gotten disconnected. Are folks able to hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. So to address your question about review timeline and prioritization, we are continuing as we've talked about before to have large volumes of submissions. And we are having to prioritize those submissions. We've discussed previously that we prioritize based on the public health need, and we consider factors such as whether the product would serve a significant unmet need, particularly in terms of access, such as at-home specimen collection or at-home testing, or the ability to expand the availability significantly, such as the quantity and manufacturing capacity. So those are some of the considerations that go into our prioritization. And additionally, we are trying to review as quickly as possible, but we do use those prioritization factors to determine the order in which we review and where we spend our resources. And we also consider, how complete a submission is in terms of whether we can move that forward. So, Tim, it looks like you might be back on. We just went through a little bit on prioritization, but if you want to go into more detail, please do.
Sorry. Hopefully I'm not crackly. I think I might not have a good line, but I don't want to risk disconnecting. So I got disconnected.
You sound good now.
Okay. The priorities. So if somebody has come in and there's two different kinds of lower priority. So if someone's in and you have not have an active reviewer, but we haven't made a determination, we will get to your applications as soon as possible. And this is especially true for those who have notified the FDA and are allowed to sell their tests in the United States prior to an FDA authorization. We are making some other decisions and sending out deprioritization letters. And I did want to go over that now in more detail. So we do continue to receive a high volume of EUA requests and want to again share our priorities. As we stated before, we believe we're at a different stage in the pandemic now than we were even a half year ago or several months ago in terms of tests available and testing needs. And so accordingly, we have prioritized reviews and authorizations of EUA requests that take into account a variety of factors, as discussed in the guidance, emergency use authorization of medical products and related authorities. Important to this is the public health need for the product and the availability of the product, how much product could be brought into the U.S. Over time, and certain things like, I'll go into some of those other details, but, product availability is also important. We have, for example, prioritized review of EU requests that have to do with increasing test accessibility. For example, point-of-care tests, home collection kits, home tests, and those tests that would significantly increase testing capacity, for example, tests that significantly reduce reliance on test supplies that may limit access, as well as those tests that are extremely high throughput and widely distributed and can run on platforms that are widely distributed in order to best address public health needs. But if you're a notified test and you're allowed to be on the market, you may be in a lower priority than this, but you can stay on the market. But we are on new test submissions. We are occasionally making determinations that we're not likely to get to those EUAs, and so there's a different kind of response from the FDA. It's important to ensure, and it's critical to ensure adequate supply chains for authorized tests and avoid spot shortages and widespread shortages of testing supplies. So especially for priority tests, we would like to avoid those shortages that could happen with diversion of supplies away from non-priority tests. Also, diverting as way of explanation for these priorities in more detail, diverting reviewer time to reviewing EUAs that would minimally contribute to the expanding U.S. testing capacity or patient access to testing would delay the review of EUAs for tests that would better serve the public. That's the reason for some of the shuffling and the prioritization that's going on now with tests that have been submitted. Additionally, even for priority tests, if the data in that EUA request does not support its use, the data isn't good enough, we have an obligation at the FDA to decline an EUA authorization to protect the American public. When we do receive a complete submission, this is important, with good data for a priority test, we move quickly to authorize it, as we have done this week with the authorization of another home test, the Quidel QuickVue test. It is by prescription right now, but the developer has publicly stated that they intend to come in with an over-the-counter submission, and we look forward to that submission, as we do for any home test, home collection, whether it be by or point-of-care test, whether it be by prescription or for the home tests over-the-counter. And so we do not sit on good priority tests that have complete submissions. We are committed to ensuring that the public has access to a wide variety of test options, and those reviews that we're doing now, we believe, due to this prioritization, are the most critical ones needed to address the pandemic at this stage. So at the start of the pandemic, since the start of the pandemic, we have authorized over 300 tests and almost 250 molecular tests, 5 home tests now, over 40 collection home kits. So this access has been very important. Additionally, there's a concerted effort by the U.S. government to invest in increasing production of select tests and supporting development of certain tests through the Rad-X program. I'd refer you to the Rad-X and other elements of the U.S. government to talk about their prioritizations. We do believe this may, in fact, be a more effective strategy at this point in increasing testing capacity and access over a more broad approach to, making all tests of equal priority, shall we say. If you have a question about determining whether a test that you have in development would be considered high priority review, we recommend that you submit either a pre-EUA or even just an EUA, just an email, either a pre-EUA or an email to our EUA template email box, which is crh-EUA-templates at fda.hhs.gov, with information about the features of your test in either a pre-EUA or an email, as I said. It's helpful to have information about your intended patient population, the patient setting, whether it's central lab, point of care, home collection, or home testing, what its throughput is, on an instrument for a given shift with a single staff member in the lab, and what your manufacturing capacity is. This will help us to assess how we would prioritize such an EUA request. So that was in great detail. I hope that is all helpful for folks to understand our current priorities and why we're making those priorities and why we're making this clear now. Toby, anything to add on that?
No, I think that covered all of it. Yeah.
I do also want to make a couple of other brief announcements and then turn it back over to Toby for the rest of the call, as I'm going to have to drop off again today. Abbott has now been authorized for a 9-month dating on their Abbott BinaxNow. There were some reports product in the field that may go out of date. Abbott has addressed this through a letter to customers, which you can reach out to Abbott about. Many customers have now received that, I'm aware. So all products that they've produced for the Abbott BinaxNow from the beginning can now have 9-month dating. Hold on to that letter if you're a lab, and should CLIA come in to inspect, show them that letter as far as whether or not it was okay to run a test kit that has an expiration date on it. This letter supersedes the expiration date on those kit lots that are provided in the letter provided by Abbott, and CMS has signaled that they will review those letters, and if the kit lot that you're using is on that list and you're using it up until the new expiration date, you should be fine. I also wanted to say that there is now an Ebola outbreak in Africa, that there is testing going on upon entry to the U.S. from certain locations outside the U.S. We do have still, the emergency is still declared for Ebola. We do have 10 EUA tests listed on the FDA website. We also granted one de novo test for Ebola, and so just wanted to make that aware for all. And Toby, I'm going to turn this over to you for continuing to answer questions on this call. Thank you.
Great, and I had a couple of updates as well that I can give now while we're on a break from questions, and then we can jump back to the questions. Excuse me. So Tim did already mention that this week we authorized the Quidel QuickVue home test, and that was an additional home test to add to the availability there. We've also recently authorized several home collection tests for direct-to-consumer non-prescription use. So those can be found on our website as well. If you're looking at the EUA table and you search for DTC, direct-to-consumer, those will all come up if you're interested in taking a look at those. I also wanted to give a clarification to a point that was discussed on last week's call. There was a question regarding comparator tests for flu for use with or for validating multianalyte SARS-CoV-2 tests. And so we just wanted to clarify that we do have recommendations regarding which flu tests should be used as a comparator, and we prefer molecular flu tests that have been cleared in the last 5 years, or at least that have clinical data from the last 5 years, to ensure that those comparators are detecting currently circulating strains. And if you have a question about an appropriate comparator, you can reach out to the EUA mailbox, and we would recommend doing this before performing your study to ensure that that you confirm that you're using an appropriate comparator before collecting data. And with that, I think we can turn back to questions.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Franco. Your line is now open.
Thank you, Toby. So first, I'd like to point out that our test probably, at least in our opinion, qualifies as a priority test because it's designed to be self-use at home, and it's the pure naked paper strip. The closest one to it would be the one that you just approved by Quidel, except that Quidel's is by prescription, and our plan is to make it over the counter or DTC. And I wanted to ask you if you could tell if there is a difference between OTC and DTC. That's one thing. The other point I wanted to make was that during all this time that we have been trying to get the validation taken care of, we have had to identify new suppliers, new OEMs, because we had some issues with the previous ones. And so we now have the ability to work with multiple suppliers, probably 4 or 5 at least, which in terms of the production, we're talking now tens of millions of tests that could be potentially made available, should we be able to complete the validation. And my next point is regarding the analytical validation, which we actually started going through with one service provider, but then we ran into some issues. So then we had to go back to the drawing board, working with a different OEM. And it turns out that this OEM that we are working with says that they can provide the analytical information required by FDA. I'm referring to the bacterial interference. I'm referring to the endogenous effects, the hook effect, and all those requirements. The OEM is based in China, okay, and the question related to that is, would FDA be amenable to looking and not only that, but actually accepting the analytical information that is provided by the OEM related to that? The other question I have is regarding the reporting component. When we go through the usability studies, does FDA want us to go through the complete reporting process, or do we stop it at a simulation level? Do we actually have to? I hope my question makes sense. So what I'm asking is if we actually have to report the results of the usability study in the way that a person would do if they actually got a test once we got EUA. And the final one, and I am sorry, this is a lot. I know that there has been a design-a-thon going on, which was, I believe, funded by HSS. I wonder if you have any resources for the companies that have been chosen in that design-a-thon, so that maybe we can contact them about the reporting component. Sorry if I asked you too many questions there.
So that was quite a few questions. I will try to address each of those points as best as I can. First, regarding DTC and OTC, we've tried to use that terminology to make a distinction between a home test and a home collection test. So over-the-counter or OTC and direct-to-consumer DTC are both non-prescription. They are, by regulation really, or their use are, EUAs, but OTC is the official term for what we use for non-prescription. But most people think about OTC as something that you can purchase, bring home, and use completely at home. So we've mostly been using OTC to refer to those at-home tests, whereas direct-to-consumer or DTC we usually use when we're referring to a home collection test where the collection is done at home, but you need to send your sample to a lab for processing. So it's not performed fully in the home the way that a strip like it sounds like yours might be.
Okay. Right. Okay.
You had I didn't fully understand your question about multiple suppliers, but I know you mentioned analytical validation from China. As long as it's properly properly documented, there's and the data looks appropriate, we can accept that. We do prefer that the clinical data, especially usability data, is done here in the U.S.
Of course.
And in terms of usability, we do expect to see for an over-the-counter test, we would expect both usability and user comprehension and to be provided.
Right.
And I don't have information about the HHS design-a-thon. I would suggest reaching out to them directly.
Okay, so just Just one further question regarding the reporting part of the test. So again, this, our test is for self-use at home. So if we're talking about the reporting component, I don't want to get into technical, but when we do the usability, do we actually have to go through the entire process? We have to complete the reporting, meaning that the reporting does go all the way to wherever it needs to go, just as if a user was actually purchasing an EUA approved test, or how far do we take the reporting in the usability exercise?
Are you talking about reporting the
result?
The individual,
yeah,
or reporting to public health?
Well, the reports of the individual tests, because my understanding from previous calls is that FDA recommends tests that do have some reporting capability, and I also understand that it's not a must, but I take that the recommendation is that if the application has a reporting component, that FDA would be more amenable to that application versus one that does not have a reporting component. So again, do we have to take the reporting all the way to the finish line? Does that make sense?
You're referring to reporting to public health authorities, not
reporting. Correct.
That's something that we could work with you during your submission. It's not something that we have that we would hold up an authorization for. So that's something that we would work with you on. We do want to see usability and user comprehension at least to the point where the individual is getting their own result and understanding their own result.
Okay, very good. I'm sorry for taking so much of your time. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. As a reminder, to ask a question, please press *1 and record your name clearly when prompted. Our next question comes from Kathleen Copeland. Your line is now open.
Hello. We're developing a point-of-care antigen test using saliva collection, and the test is very quick and is expected to be high throughput. So my question is around the saliva collection device. So if we do this test, with under CLIA waiver at sites like airports or offices or something like that, where maybe there's a line of people waiting to submit their sample, what is the level of supervision required for sample collection? So in other words, can we give the collection device to somebody standing in the line waiting to deposit their sample, and then as long as the healthcare worker tests the sample, looks at the sample to make sure that there's enough to do the testing, is that sufficient? Or as part of the EUA, do we have to do additional testing in the clinical study?
So we would want to see your test validated the way that you intend it to be used. So if you intend it to be used for unobserved self-collection, then we would expect your validation to be done in that same circumstance. And so then so that would be sort of up to you and up to the performance of the test of, whether it's impacted by those conditions, and whether or not anything needs to be adjusted to get appropriate performance.
But would we have to do more than 30 people, net positives and 30 negatives? Would we have to do different age groups, or can we just do all comers?
I don't have the template up in front of me, so I don't want to misspeak on that. But I believe that the template does outline what we would want to see in those studies. And if you have questions beyond what for your particular circumstance, beyond what the template says, I would suggest sending that into to the mailbox or submitting an pre-EUA rather, if you want to discuss your study design. But generally, the recommendations for study design that are in the template should be applicable.
I guess then my question is which template, because for POC, we just need to follow the antigen template for test developers, right? Not the one for non-laboratory use.
That's correct. We would want to see, the additional point of care considerations in terms of usability, but you would not need to do the non-lab additions if you're planning for it to be used at the point of care.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. And our next question comes from Andrew Lulier. Your line is now open.
Hi, Toby. Good to talk to you again. We have a number of people who we're talking to who are interested in submitting some point of care tests. And we have just kind of a general question in terms of prioritization for you here, which is that they're interested in doing something I know a number of people have done where they put in a more simple EUA submission first. That's just for high complexity lab use. And then they want to update the EUA later with the point of care or home use or whatever the claim may be. So in terms of how prioritization might impact that, if they notify and it's kind of not a high priority and they're not assigned a reviewer right away, when they then get everything together for point of care or home use or anything like that and submit that update, does that automatically bump it up the priority list or might it get stuck in limbo?
That's an interesting question. I would suggest that, well, so I mean, yes, it would bump them up in priority. It may not be picked up right away. That it might not be obvious to our process right away that is the case, and so you may need to particularly flag that you'd like it to be reconsidered for prioritization. Generally, if a test is designed to be used at the point of care, it's not likely to have as much usefulness in a high complexity setting because it's usually not designed to be a high throughput test that a high complexity lab would find much use for. So it's we have found in working with developers that it's usually more beneficial to focus on getting all of the point of care fully fleshed out and ready, and then submitting a fully completed submission for the actual purpose that you are intending. It does, sort of confuses things to submit it for one use when you don't really intend it to be used there, and then update it later.
Thank you. And our next question comes from Shannon Clark. Your line is now open.
Oh, hello. Shannon Clark with User Consulting. So we do a bunch of home use or OTC or prescription-only testing with intended users. And there's a requirement in the non-laboratory template to use users with no experience with self-collection. We're experiencing a problem here in the Bay Area, California, because now all the adolescents are going back to school and they're required to self-swab twice a week in order to go back to school. So recruitment of adolescents is getting more and more difficult as the days go by. And now the intended users basically all have experience with self-collection, so it'd be a little odd to just try to select and cherry pick the homeschooled adolescents who have no experience. So do you think the FDA might change their position on this requirement to have individuals with no self-collection, or could we at least reduce the requirement to individuals with no experience with anterior and areas of collection in the case that we're pursuing that swab?
That's an interesting situation that I think we may need to have some further discussion about. If you could send that question in and flag it for me, we can have some further dialogue on that.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. And I believe our next name was Zach. Your line is now open. Sorry, I did not get your name completely. I believe it was Zach O'Keefe, but your line is now open. We'll move on to our next caller. The next question comes from Seth. Your line is now open. And check your mute feature. Seth, your line is now open. You may ask your question. Not hearing a response, we'll move on to the next question. It comes from Nancy Rector. Your line is now open.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay, great. I do not have a question. I have an answer for the individual that asked about the design-a-thon. My company, UdoTest, is one of the 16 companies in the design-a-thon, and we do definitely have a software. Our aspect is a software that connects the patient demographics and information to HHS and to state authorities. So is it okay if I provide an email address for that individual that was looking for some entry into the group, the HHS group?
Sure.
Okay, so they can email us at partners, PARTNERS, at UdoTest, UDOTEST, and we'll get back with you as far as assisting you with developing that software and getting you in to introduce you to the companies. It's a great network, and I'm very impressed with what they're doing and what HHS has done, and I'm very impressed with what you all have done. I've been in the industry for a couple of decades, and y'all are doing a great job. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
No problem. That's it. Thanks.
As a reminder, to ask a question, please press *1 and record your name clearly when prompted. Please ensure your line is not muted. Our next question comes from Kumudi. Your line is now open.
Thank you for taking my question. Toby, I have a request. This call, initially also there was some technical difficulty, and in between I got disconnected. Is there any way that Timothy's and your statement that was read, whether that can be posted instead of us waiting 2 weeks for the transcript to come?
I don't know that we can get anything up separately from the transcript, but the transcript will be posted as soon as it's available, and we'll try and get that up quickly.
But it is not a recorded, document that he read, or he was just, because I just, when he was talking about the priority or something like that, I got disconnected and I did not get a chance to hear. If it is a statement that he read, is there a possibility of making that statement available?
Oh, no, it was not a written statement, but we did, provide some information, and it, obviously it will be in the transcript, but information about the prioritization, as we've discussed before, and some of the factors that we consider.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Scott Turkey. Your line is now open.
Hey, thanks for your time, and appreciate you doing this. My group has licensed a couple new technologies that is rapid testing for COVID, and it is based on protein synthesis that we have patented out of two universities that were funded by NIH in the Rad-X grant that result in less than 5 minutes, and I can produce it less than 1 minute. The thing that I'm wondering is we've also developed technology that where we can put a QR code on it, so if they're buying it off the shelf at Walgreens, Walmart, wherever else it is, it will actually tell the patient as to whether they're positive or negative and report to the appropriate authorities. The thing that we're doing right now is working with Indian Health Services, but my challenge is getting this thing to market right now. And I'm wondering what is the priority as far as looking at tests that I've licensed that are NIH and RadX funded versus other tests by other groups. Because I think the vaccines are going to come out and everything else, but we're still going to need testing, especially in indigent populations.
Sure. So it sounds like this is a test that you would be indicating or seeking a claim for over-the-counter or, rapid home use, something along those lines.
And so that, as we've said, would be a priority. It sounds like this may be, a newer technology, so I would suggest that you submit a pre-EUA so that we can discuss that with you and make sure that that when you submit an EUA request, it includes all of the information and all of the validation data that we would want to see. You mentioned licensing this, and so, one thing to look at there is whether this is also something that another entity is seeking to get authorization for. If the manufacturer themselves is coming in, it's much easier for us if there's a single entity that is coming in for authorization for a specific technology, and then when authorized, they can request, additional labeling to be included in the authorization for different distributors with different brand names, if that's something that that the manufacturer is looking to do to license it out. But it is much simpler for a single submission.
Well, and that's what we're doing from the whole stream of flow is one, licensing the technology, which results in I can manufacture it for less than $1 and probably get to the retail market for $5, or airports, mass transit, schools, and everything else. But we've also built in software to where when you buy it off the shelf at Walgreens, Walmart, or anything else, is that you take a picture of the result and it tells you coming back with 99% validity as to whether the result is correct or not. But two is it automatically results to the reporting agencies. Do I need to sit there and do an EUA on the software as well?
Yes, we would want to see validation of that software for the reader if it's interpreting the result for the patient. We would want to see validation for that.
Okay, so I'm fine with, because I've been in the FDA for a long time as far as the validation on the studies, as far as the validity of the test. But that's what I'm wondering is because my vision is you buy this thing off of a shelf in a pharmacy, and for less than $5, you also get the software that comes to it that does the reporting and gives you a validation and a authentication letter that, like, if you wanted to travel or anything else, because it's 92 to 95% sensitive. So do I have to sit there and do an EUA on the software and the test, or how do I combine those two together? Because we brought the technology to the test. Do you know what I'm saying?
So we would, as I said, I would suggest that you submit a pre-EUA because it does sound like we would want to discuss the approach with you, and then we could figure out the best pathway there. But yes, we would need to see an EUA for the software with the test.
Thank you. As a reminder, to ask a question, please press *1. Our next question comes from Franco. Your line is now open.
Hi, Travi. Thank you again. So I actually had a related question to the reporting again. So regarding the data, how long do we need to maintain that data as a test developer? How long do we have to keep that, and where do we submit it? Do we have to submit it to some authority from time to time? Do you have anything on that? Because as of now, there's only one test, right? It's the Illum test that is 100% home use, no prescription. So it's really hard to go and look at what others are doing, to kind of, follow the same path, if you will.
Are you talking about reporting out to public health authorities?
Yes. Correct. Sorry. Yes.
Okay. I'm not going to, unfortunately, be able to answer your question about how long to store data. I'm not sure that we would expect the individual data to be going back to the manufacturer. So that's something that we would have to discuss with the reporting experts. If you send in your question to the mailbox, we could connect you with the right folks there.
Okay, thank you.